episode 9 of the Woke-ish podcast. This is Ebony.
And this is Alma.
Thanks so much for listening. So this week we're going to be discussing kind of being woke in non-woke spaces and having quote-unquote non-woke networks, like how you negotiate that. But before we get there, we're going to start out with our shout-out segment.
Yeah, so I wanted to start out with a video I saw about an 11-year-old girl named Mariana Taylor. And so she took a knee during the Pledge of Allegiance at school. And so if you guys remember, you say in a lot of schools, you say the Pledge of Allegiance every day. And when you say the Pledge of Allegiance, you stand up and put your hand over your heart. And so she apparently took a knee during, and she's, I don't know, she looks white, but I don't know. She's not black. And she said that she was inspired by Colin Kaepernick, but that the teacher scolded her for doing so and told her that in this country you have to take the good with the bad. The teacher told her how she had family overseas fighting and it was disrespectful. And so, of course, if you're 11 and your teacher's telling you like these things, it can be really hurtful. So she cried, and she, in the interview, she was saying that although she didn't feel it was right for her teacher to talk to her like that, but that she believes it's important to stand up for what you believe in, because if you don't, then who will? And as a result of that, as a reaction, the ACLU sent out a statement saying that children are protected under the First Amendment, and so if you choose not to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance, it's your choice. And so they asked that all schools review their policies and be informed, and so kind of highlighting that schools can't force children to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. So I wanted to shout out Mariana, and she's brave. There are a lot of people who are a lot older who wouldn't have the guts to do that, and she was the only one in her classroom, and to be told by an authority figure that what you're doing is wrong can be really stressful. And so just a shout out to her, and hopefully she can inspire a lot of us wherever we go. As football season's about to start pretty soon, in a couple of months, and whatever your decision is to do, whatever people decide to do, it's like this little girl has, the guts to be able to follow through with what she believes, and you don't have to be part of a community to support them. And so shout out to her.
Yeah, shout out to her. So second on the shout out docket is, I'm pretty sure you've seen this video. It's gone viral. I've seen it like a million times this week. But 22-year-old, I don't want to butcher his name, Mamadou Gassam, and he is a Malian man living in France. So last week he climbed a 5-story apartment building to save a 4-year-old boy who was like dangling off a ledge. This guy, he moved to France in September to join his older brother, who has lived in France for decades. And he said that he was just walking down the street and he saw this kid dangling and like didn't think twice, just ran over and literally like somehow with core and upper body strength sent from God himself, like,
yes. And pretty fast.
Pulled himself up from balcony to balcony and rescued this little boy. Meanwhile, father of the child left the child alone while he shopped and played Pokemon Go. So the dad was actually detained overnight for alleged parental neglect and actually has to appear in court in September. But what's awesome about this, so one shout out goes to the person that saved this kid, and then the second shout out goes to the French president Emmanuel Macron, who offered to begin the naturalization process to make Gassama a French citizen, and said that because this is an exceptional act, we are obviously today going to regularize all your papers. So so they're beginning the process of citizenship for this young man who immigrated from Mali last year. So shout out to him and shout out to France.
Yeah, rewarding people when because I'm sure he didn't think that anything would come from it, and so it's just really nice to see that someone can just be moved to act and to help, and the little boy was okay. And
thank God. Like, what? That was just, it was so insane to watch.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I mean, from both of these people have, like, more core strength than I do.
Yeah,
like, this
baby,
4-year-old. Yeah, just, like, holding himself up and, like, dangling. Like, oh, my God. It was so scary to watch. And his dad just barely doing anything.
And then people, too, just screaming, like, not knowing what to do.
Yeah, I mean, because how do you...
No.
I would be looking... I mean, I guess maybe I would be trying to prepare myself to try to catch the little boy, but...
I wouldn't think to
climb up.
No.
Scale the side of a building.
Like you were saying, even if we wanted to, I don't think I physically could do that.
I know for a fact. I've never done a pull-up. Never. Oh, my God.
So, shout out to him for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our In the Know segment. Okay, so now transitioning into our In the Know segment.
Yes, and so we're going to get started with a story that has been kind of in the news for the past couple of days, and that's Roseanne getting canceled. And so it's like funny, but it's just like frustrating. And so what's really crazy is that Roseanne was a really popular show in the 90s about a working class family. And I actually watched, and we talked about this, like I watched the episodes because I thought it was, I don't know, it was kind of like, my family was poor, so there was some similarities in like their struggles of paycheck to paycheck, not having insurance, so I kind of, I mean, and it's a white family, so there was things that I didn't relate to.
I've just never seen an episode.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, now you can't.
Yeah.
But so it returned in March after 2-decade absence, and it was apparently one of the highest rating shows on ABC. So like even to the point where Trump like called Roseanne and was like, congratulations on like your show, because he claims that this highlights that there are a large group of people that this show speaks to, like a group of working class white people who wanted their voice to be heard. And so initially the show was kind of, it was inclusive, but also kind of on the bridge of being kind of problematic sometimes. Like they really criticized Blackish and the show Fresh Off the Boat, saying that was racist.
Oh, on the actual show?
Yeah, on the show. So it was one of their topics. Yeah. But then they also talked about how they had a gay grandson and like accepting him, and so there was it was kind of, I don't know.
But then I read about like their whole Islamophobia episode.
That's
the family next door.
Yeah, that's why it's
and,
like
asking if they're terrorists.
Yeah, so they have some inclusivity on some things, but then they're really problematic on others. Yeah. And so apparently she had this Twitter rant or tweet where she wrote. It was in regards to Valerie Jarrett, an African-American woman who was a senior advisor to Barack Obama. And she wrote, if the Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby, it equals VJ, which is Valerie Jarrett. And so as a result of that, there's a lot of backlash. Wanda Sykes, who was a consultant to the show, immediately wrote a tweet that said, I will no longer be part of Roseanne. A lot of her castmates sent out tweets saying that they were really appalled, and eventually ABC sent out a statement saying that it was canceled, and it was just canceled hours after so it happened really fast. And so she later apologized and said that it was due to like Ambien and just like she wasn't in the right space, and that's definitely not, she understands why people are mad, that it was not a good thing to do. But then I was reading recently, and it seems like she kind of is backing down on that stance, and so she later tweeted about how upset she was at her castmates for, she said, throwing her under the bus.
She did that all on her own.
I know. And then, of course, a lot of people are tweeting at her, that it's really unfair, what about freedom of speech, blah, 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 that it's not racist, that... So my favorite was, technically, we're all related to monkeys and apes. So it's not racist.
Okay, yeah, but first of all, the generation that she comes from,
it was totally racist.
Plenty aware of the fact that, you know, black people have been related to and called monkeys as a racial slur.
Yeah.
And then also, I mean, this reference to the Muslim Brotherhood. So I was reading, and apparently Valerie Jarrett is half Iranian and half black.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that wasn't by accident. Like,
No,
you're literally referencing the fact that she's biracial and, you know, using that in whatever these terms are. So, I mean, you're full aware of how this would be received. And, I mean, going back to, well, I know that you still have more to say, but I mean, I think, like, she is, I mean, this is a very good example of how people have been talking about since Trump was elected, how people have been feeling so emboldened by his election to just do and say whatever. Yeah. And, I mean, all the ridiculousness that he tweets, it's like, can we really expect different from his base? No. Yeah. Like, obviously they think that this is okay if the president is doing it.
Yeah.
And he is.
And he tweeted about this, but of course not about what she said.
Yeah.
He was just kind of, you know, he's a really big fan apparently of Roseanne, and I think he just likes anything that he thinks will get him like more popularity and stuff. But I think what's also an issue that a lot of people have brought up is that she had made similar tweets like 2013 or something about another reference to another Obama advisor, comparing them to monkeys or apes, and she had the whole picture where she dressed up as Hitler and was baking like Jewish people cookies. And so it's not, and so I've been reading and listening to a lot of people who are saying that yes, ABC was right to cancel her now, but like, why did she even get a show after she had already this history of saying all these issues? And then people talking about her castmates. I know one of her castmates, the one who plays her daughter Darlene, she's on a talk show, and like the day after they didn't address it like in the whole talk show. So it was like on purpose, they avoided the topic. And so it's just kind of like, if you're able to tweet and say that you don't agree with her stance, that you don't agree with what you're saying, why is it not something that you could talk about in your show where you have a platform to be able to say it's not okay? And a lot of people are also saying that they're kind of lying if they're saying that they're surprised, because someone who's racist and who says things like that isn't just going to do it all of a sudden. Yeah. And so going back to what Trump said, Trump didn't say anything about Roseanne or her tweet, but said something about the head of Disney and how if she got fired for saying terrible things about Valerie, why didn't they get fired? Why didn't anything happen to ABC when they said terrible things about Trump? Yeah. And so just kind of like,
and saying that he's still waiting on his call.
Yeah, he's waiting for his apology. And so it's just, you know, once again, the symbolic leader of this country is not able to denounce something that is like a lot of white people themselves has said this is racist. People who work with her, even Roseanne initially said, yeah, that was a terrible thing that I said.
Yeah, but if Trump wasn't willing to denounce the KKK.
Yeah,
so he's not gonna denounce Roseanne. I mean,
he's racist. Another example that
zero expectations.
Yeah, another example I think in how he reacted to Roseanne getting canceled, that that 45 is racist, and he supports racist rhetoric, and he doesn't think it's wrong. And if he did, he would say something about it. And it's just like, Obama isn't president anymore. Like, to constantly just keep, like, people are so bothered about his, you know, presidency and the people that he brought with him and who he put together, that, like, Valerie Jarrett got dragged into. And so it's just, a part of me, I was telling you, didn't know what ABC was going to do, because, you know, sometimes they just have people take vacation or like suspended or release a statement or do something. And so the fact that they canceled her show, and not only canceled her show, but canceled the syndication of the reruns for her old show.
I didn't know about that.
So they used to get royalties on those shows. And like that has been going on for like years. Every episode, every actor makes money off of that show. So now not only did she screw herself out of money, but she screwed her castmates out of money. And so I just think that ABC did, you know, props to ABC for handling this in the best way, but it's just not surprising that someone who had the second highest rating show on one of the biggest networks in television is a racist.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, a part of me wonders if the reason for it happening is, or how much it has to do with the fact that the president is a black woman, you know, and I wonder if she was like,
yeah,
you know, like, I mean, in sisterhood, like, you will not be dragging us on Twitter while, you know, you have a show that's syndicated on my network.
Yeah, and another cast, when Wanda said she was no longer going to consult, another castmate had said she wasn't going to return to the show. So I think if they hadn't canceled the show, they would have had to replace people. Like, it still would have had to do some rearranging, but I think you're right, the fact that there was a female president in this company, that hopefully, you know, that's what happens when you have more diverse people in management, is you're forced to have more pressure to hold people more accountable than when we maybe someone who wasn't a person of color would.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so I guess moving on to our second topic for In the Know. So this has just been a super messy week. So Kim Kardashian has been helping to campaign for Alice Marie Johnson's presidential pardon. So Alice Johnson is a 62-year-old great-grandmother who was incarcerated in October 1996 for a first-time nonviolent drug offense after she helped to facilitate communications in a drug trafficking case. She served 21 years of her life sentence so far. So Kim K headed to the Oval Office to meet with none other than I liked what you said, symbolic leader.
Yeah.
So our president, Trump, to discuss mass incarceration with him, specifically advocating for the release of Alice Johnson. So while we're going to talk about Kim Kardashian, I wanted to first give a little bit of background, or I guess not even background, but to kind of frame like what's going on with Alice Johnson right now, because I mean, it was just really crazy to read about. So the Can Do for Clemency organization has, along with the ACLU, has advocated for Alice Johnson since 2014, when she became number one on the Can Do's top 25 women deserving of clemency. Soon after the Clemency Project of 2014 was launched by the Obama administration. So only 4 women on the Can Do's original top 25 are still in prison, which added insult to injury when President Obama denied Alice's clemency petition, considering her exemplary conduct and achievements over the past 21 years, support, exposure, and heartfelt remorse expressed while Skyping from prison into numerous Ivy League universities. So even the warden at the FCI, Aliceville, her case manager, the captain, and her vocational training instructor wrote letters supporting her clemency, which is virtually unheard of. So it's like really, really crazy that, you know, Obama didn't pardon her.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I mean, I wish I knew why.
Yeah.
I have no idea. So, yeah, I mean, I also wanted to give a little bit of information about Alice Johnson herself. So this is a direct quote from her. She says, "Society, you don't know what you're missing. I have so much life in me, so much left to give. I never expected to find myself in a situation like this. I never expected to be one of the ones forgotten by society, locked away for life. Yet I know that people would help if they only knew how to help. I have been a resident of Memphis, Tennessee since 1979, where I worked most of my life and raised my children. I currently have strong support from politicians, clergy, and my community in Memphis. They have played a major role in helping and in encouraging others to support my clemency efforts. Upon my release from prison, I plan to return to Memphis, where I have immediate employment already secured. My desire upon release is to assist my community with the needs of ex-offenders to help reduce recidivism. I know firsthand what struggles they will be facing and the support they will need to overcome the stigma of being a convicted felon. I will use my knowledge and expertise in interviewing and job preparedness to help them make full use of their capabilities and talents. Once they can find a job to support themselves, the lure of illegal gain will be much slimmer." That point is like one that I I was like really moved by that sentence, because it seems like something that our criminal justice system is just completely unaware of, that our society is just completely unaware of, that job gatekeepers are completely unaware of. So she said, once they can find a job to support themselves, the lure of illegal gain will be much slimmer. So what she's talking about right now are recidivism rates, which are super high. But the reason that they're high, I think, is because people can't find jobs when they get out of prison. Because, I mean, the scarlet letter of, you know, being once incarcerated follows you forever. So it's like, why? I mean, it just makes sense that if you have meaningful income, you won't commit crimes.
I mean, my brother has a college degree. After he's incarcerated, and he hasn't been able to find a job in almost 2 years, because every time they get to the point where they're like, okay, they even told him, you're hired, and then they're like, I'm sorry, your background check came back and we can't hire you. So right now he's unemployed, and it's like, and he has a college degree, and a lot of people aren't in that position, but just like highlighting that even people who are able to, you know, in quote unquote have the ability to get jobs can't, because you know, like you said, it's the scarlet letter. So this is something that is really real, and so I mean, it's just awesome that she's like even thinking about other people.
It's ridiculous. Like, I think that that's something that I would definitely encourage if I had direct contact with Kim Kardashian, and I could say, you know, hey, like, if you're gonna push anything with Trump or with any politician, like, I think that is one of the biggest, among so many other things, flaws of our country and the way that we handle mass incarceration. It's like, we just allow, like, there's so much prejudice involved, and people have way too much discretion. Like, I think that when it comes to nonviolent offenses, or maybe when there's a certain amount of time that has passed, and it's obvious that this person is able to, you know, rejoin society in a meaningful way and all of that stuff, they shouldn't have to carry this around forever. Because, how can you be productive? How can we expect, if we genuinely claim that we expect for people to be rehabilitated once they're released from prison, if that is actually the point, then we should allow them the opportunity to prove that. So she says that, you know, I am positive that I will be the one to make a difference, because I have been one of them myself. And other people, and speaking of her, have said that she's remorseful and agrees she deserved to be punished, but a life sentence is very harsh for a first offender. Alice refuses to play the victim card, and from the day she arrived in prison, she has enrolled in and completed a long list of programs, courses, rehabilitative classes. She also mentors women in her unit, and I read that she is a playwright and has written like hundreds of plays for like her fellow inmates, and they've, you know, acted in these plays, they've sang, she's just like puts the skills that they have to use. So, on her behalf, Kim Kardashian met with President Trump and Jared Kushner. I'm not sure what came of that meeting, but, Trump tweeted that it went well. He tweeted out a picture of them. So, I'm like, let's talk. Mass incarceration is one of our country's most horrendous problems, alongside mass murders. Leave it to the United States to do everything in mass. Go hard or go home, right? And then it's only exacerbated when race is taken into account. Racialized mass incarceration is like a plague. Every level of our judicial system works in concert to disproportionately police and incarcerate people of color, and Black people in particular. Black men are the highest incarcerated group, and Black women are the fastest growing. And I'm sure that there are tons of stories like Alice Johnson's that would just break our hearts a million times over. Many don't want to believe it, but our system is corrupt. We have judges who are heavily invested in correction corporations, such as the CCA, America's leading provider of public provider partnership corrections solutions. We need to look very closely at judges' sentencing practices. Every long-term or life sentence is an income stream that goes into their pockets, and they tend to go after low-income people without the money or influence for long court battles. When it's discovered that a judge is doing this, we need to investigate the sentencing practices of others, rather than just assuming that judge is the only one and is unique. So, I'd love to believe that good will come of this. I hope it does. This woman's story is completely heartbreaking, but, I mean, I guess what I'm really concerned about with Kim Kardashian is that in having this conversation and having conversations about mass incarceration, that a focus on race will be completely absent from the conversation. And I'm assuming that based on, every time that Kim Kardashian has been confronted about something potentially problematic that she's done, or actually problematic that she's done, she's said that she and her family don't see color. So my question is, like, if the underlying issue in Johnson's and many other individuals' cases is that, it's racism, it's a product of racism, how can Kim be expected to be the spokesperson on their behalf? Like, I'm almost 100% certain that race was absent from this conversation.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't imagine Trump being willing to have a meaningful and productive conversation about race.
No, all Trump heard was Obama didn't do this.
Yeah,
and so that's he's gonna be like, oh, yeah, then I'll do it.
Yeah. No, I think that's what will happen, and I actually kind of hope that happens.
Yeah, it's like the only way.
But my only fear is that he'll do that for Johnson, and then maybe the other 4 people that are still, or the other 3 people that are still on that top 25 list. Mm-hmm. But I don't know that it's gonna do anything for. It's not going to have any, like, preventative measure or whatever for future people being incarcerated for the same reason, especially while he's trying to reinvigorate the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Like, I think that we need to have a conversation about racialized mass incarceration in order for anything good to happen in the future. Like, I mean, our system as it stands, if it just continues on this path and we take this colorblind approach, I don't, especially while he's, he stated that he wanted to declare martial law in Chicago, like he wants to reinstate stop and frisk in New York. Just all of these, like, really racialized things. Yeah. It's like, we have to have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
So,
or he, like, talks about drug dealers in terms of, like, MS-13 and, his version of drug dealers are, like, people that you see in movies, but doesn't talk about the fact that our biggest drug dealers now, one of the biggest epidemic is opiates, and the people who prescribe that are big pharmaceutical companies and doctors.
Yep.
And so the fact that I'm, like, in his whole, like, life prison for drug dealers, a life sentence for drug dealers, are they going to get a life sentence for doctors? Life sentence for presidents of pharmacies? No. I was reading that there's actually, like, more regulation. He's all about less regulation. So, like, less regulation so that more people can have access to opiates. And they're not funding the committee that he said he was going to have to deal with the opiate epidemic. And so, opiates initially was a white problem, but now it's seeping into, I was reading in NPR, it's seeping into communities of color. And it's like, and what I interpreted when I saw that, I was like, oh, now that's the scapegoat. So, the opiate epidemic is going to be like, okay, fine, we'll pay attention, but now since it's
going to be racialized.
Yeah, and so it's just, if you don't do anything about it, it used to be crack, it used to be cocaine, it used to be, now marijuana is getting legalized, and that's a whole other issue because some states legalize marijuana but still don't rescind the people, the sentences for people who are in jail for marijuana.
Yeah,
and
no, of course not. Because they're making tons of money off those people.
Yeah, and some people can form companies, white politicians can feel okay and stepping out and saying, I'm going to fund, medical marijuana, but people who are in jail or who have been incarcerated for selling marijuana, for using marijuana, for being users, for selling whatever, like, they're still in jail, and there's no talk about, okay, if we're legalizing it in some states, then let's make sure.
Yeah, and if we are going to begin to profit off the tax money when this drug is sold, like, so we are now profiting off of a drug that we have literally put people in prison for life.
Yeah. So definitely a bigger conversation that needs to happen, but I think you're right. I think that there wasn't a race conversation because I don't think that Kim Kardashian really, and you and I were talking about it, and it's like maybe she doesn't know the extent of the race conversation. Maybe she was just, I don't think she's a terrible person. I think that she was really moved by this story because she's a mom and, she has biracial children. She's married to a black man, and so I think there's a sense of her
she
that
says that she doesn't even see.
I know color. She doesn't see color. That's
she
true.
Doesn't see their
but I think there's a sense where she's like, okay, this is really messed up that this happened to a woman, and so she was moved to help her on that aspect, and I'm glad that she is doing something other than quote unquote breaking the internet by being naked. But I just don't.
Emojis.
Yeah, and selling emojis, but I just think that and it's also like with this president, could he really have had a serious race conversation? And I think this president is well aware about the racial bias and
definitely.
the racial, and it's just, it doesn't fit with his narrative. And so even if there was a race story, and so I don't know, I hope that, like we were trying to access their website and it seems to be down, and so I hope that that's a result of a lot of traffic to the Can Do website, and so hopefully people, if anything, she's one of the most famous people in the world, people will pay attention to this organization. People now know Alice Johnson's name. People now know like that there are people who this can happen to, and so hopefully, if she's released, then we know that there's one person who's committed to helping others.
Yeah, and I'll put the Can Do's, like website in our description box. Hopefully by the time we air this episode, the website will be back up. And fingers crossed that something comes of this. I could totally see that. Like I was watching the video of her speaking to the universities, and this should be like a documentary, because all of the
Obamas with their Netflix.
Yeah. All these situations like this, they're so painful to read about. So painful, because I just can't imagine, her children, her grandchildren, 21 years.
Yeah, no, 21 years.
21 years is almost my entire life.
I can't imagine it's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah, for one
for
mistake.
For a first time offense.
For one mistake, and
when there are people who shot up schools,
murderers,
are on
rapists,
right
child molesters, who literally just get sentenced 25 years and get out in 10 to 15 with good behavior.
Yeah, the Santa Fe
and it sounds like she has excellent behavior. Everybody and their mom has written her a letter of rec.
Yeah, the Santa Fe shooter is out on bond, and they're saying that he was 17 and that he might be able to get be on probation. He might not even get, the rest of his life in prison.
And we have to live in a society where this person could end up being our neighbor.
Yeah.
And having shot up a school.
Get a second chance.
Yeah. No, I'll take my chances with the woman that, maybe helped to facilitate a drug exchange 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I would much prefer her as a neighbor.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Yeah.
The society that we live in. How can anybody take us seriously? Even, because it's even if you're not invested in these race issues, even if you don't see it as a race issue, if you're a patriot, you really need to take a step back and ask yourself how seriously these other countries that we are not necessarily friends with can take us. If these are the types of, this is the way that we operate.
Or how can we look down on other, say, Islamic terrorists?
No,
my gosh, they're animals. They want to kill people they don't know. And it's bro, when people do that here, we just let them out on bond. And then they just, his lawyer, the Santa Fe shooter lawyer, was just saying he's misunderstood.
So murder is misunderstood. Is what, murder, which we clearly have tons of laws against.
Yep. It's very black or white. You either kill someone or you don't.
I just don't understand. And this whole, oh my God, we could go on and on about this, but this gun conversation, and I'm so sick of seeing that it's not about the guns.
I know.
It's not about the guns. People can't even drink until they're 21.
Yeah.
But 18-year-olds can walk into Academy, buy some Nike basketball shorts, and then just walk over to the back and buy a gun.
Yeah.
It's that easy.
It is.
How in the world? I don't understand.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess before things get too much sadder, we're going to end there and transition into our What's Being Slept On segment.
So I strongly suggest that you wake the fuck up.
So now transitioning into our What's Being Slept On segment. We'll be discussing what it means and what it's like to be and not be, I guess, a woke person, like a quote unquote woke person in non-woke spaces.
Yeah, and so the spaces can be a variety of things. It doesn't have to be like all white spaces if you're a person of color, but it could just be a space where you feel that you think really differently, that you feel like really uncomfortable in navigating, that you don't feel like you belong. And it doesn't have to be, in my personal instance, it's usually school, but for a lot of people it's work, for a lot of people it's non-woke spaces are networks, or so we're gonna touch on different things, but I on our personal experiences, but I definitely think that they apply to just spaces in general. And by no means are Ebony and I saying that we are super woke 24/7 and just like,
we're like, I don't know.
Yeah, but we're
maybe 5-7, maybe not even all the time. Give me
yeah,
there's a couple
yeah.
days of the week. The weekend is completely non-woke. Like, just completely. Don't catch me on the weekend.
But just like what it's like to navigate situations and particular spaces that you find yourself in. And, we talked to some of our friends about this, and we've heard back from not a lot, because that makes it seem like we have a ton of viewers, but we've talked to some of the people who listen to our podcast who have reached out to us and told us that they also have very similar experiences. So I wanted to start out by reading from this blog that I found. It's from Black Girl in Maine Media. That's the name of the blog.
So should be a Black Girl in Maine.
I know. And so it wasn't that long, and she's basically just talking about what it's like to be non-white in white spaces. And so I'm just gonna read. This is directly from, and she doesn't write her name. She just calls herself Black Girl in Maine. And so there's no one to attribute this to.
You could probably narrow it down now.
Yeah.
We really wanted to. I know,
Yeah,
y'all got there's some social media investigators out there.
I'm sure. So she says, to be a non-white person occupying white space over time takes a toll on the body, mind, and spirit. It is quite possible to even lose yourself because you can never be yourself. To be yourself is to allow yourself to be vulnerable with someone who is probably not equipped to see what your life is like. Instead, you end up comforting the people who are supposed to comfort you. Occupying white spaces as a non-white person is to know that my anger and frustration is too hard for many of you to read, and knowing some quote-unquote unprivileged soul will tell me to suck it up, stop being angry, or some other variation of words.
That was a word.
Yeah, and so I don't think she's an academic. I think she's just talking about, Maine I don't see as very particular or diverse, or, I've never been there.
That whole New England area.
Yeah, so...
Even though there are black people in Rhode Island, apparently.
There's a little bit sprinkled everywhere. But as I was reading this, it was just kind of like never meeting someone, but knowing exactly what they're talking about. And I think for me, particularly, the part that hit home was like, you're never able to be yourself, because in order to be yourself, you have to be vulnerable, but there isn't people who are able to handle that vulnerability. And so just realizing that I feel like I'm some version of myself at school, because that's where I spend, for me, the majority of my time during the school year is in academic spaces. And I feel like there's a part of me that is myself, but I don't feel that I'm myself because I don't feel comfortable saying, I catch myself saying things in my head and not out loud. And so I'm like, why don't I say them out loud? Sometimes I even get scared when I see that someone who is non-white has listened to my podcast or references it. I'm like, oh my gosh, did they think it was white hating? Did they...
Oh, you mean someone that is white?
Yeah. When someone who's white, and they don't say anything negative about it, but it's still like the fact that I'm scared about how they feel, and I'm like, once again, worried about, are they uncomfortable? How do they feel? And not being able to just say, well, this is my opinion, this is my experience. And so I feel like a lot of times it's very hard for me, and it does take a toll in that it's taking me longer than I think it would other people to find who I am, especially as an academic and a woman of color who's an academic. And I feel like sometimes I have to do more emotional wrestling, and and especially this is highlighted for me in conferences. And so there was a time where I went to a conference and they were talking about people in the military and how the Hispanic population has really, the percentage of Hispanic people in the military has increased. And the woman who was presenting was a white woman, and her conclusion was, this is a positive thing because now Hispanic people have an avenue and an opportunity that they may not have before. And so basically,
to be in the military?
Yes. So
to die.
I for real gasped. I was like, and then my colleague later after the presentation was like, Zama, did something, like, are you okay? Which I appreciate. And she's like, Zama, and she was white. She's like, are you okay? Like, I heard you, like, gasp. I was like, did you not like something that she said? Which then is frustrating because then I have to explain that. I was like, for real, no one else thought that was an issue. And so I was like, well, for me, who know people in the military, it's just frustrating that instead of seeing like, oh man, we're really putting a lot of our Latino men at risk, because it was Latino men, a lot of Latino men are being put at risk for, you not only get some money potentially for education through the military, but the people that I know choose not to use that education money for themselves. They say, I'm going to use it for my kid. So the argument of this woman who said like, oh, well, they'll be able to fund their education. They'll be able to have insurance. So
that's the opportunity she was talking about?
She was saying that they get insurance.
The opportunity to go to war.
They can fund their education. They have employment. And they, like, some form of stability. And I was just like, that's your option. Like, you don't see that as like, oh man, it's an issue that people see, like you're saying, risking your life as the option for you to be quote unquote stable.
But I think that that's what these supposed patriots, or how they view the military generally, it's like, these, which I think is why people feel so, or they claim that they feel so passionately about the flag. Is like, oh, these people are putting their lives on the line for our country. They are going to war for our country. And so I think that maybe the perception that I have of the military and what war is just different from all of these people. Because I see, okay, if there is, like, for whatever reason, if we just have to go to war, otherwise, like, somebody's gonna come and blow us off the face of the earth, which, I mean, in all honesty, I cannot say that we would not deserve. If that were the case, like, if we just had no other choice, then okay, war. But the fact that president after president after president keeps taking us to war for no other reason than capital, and resources, and to bully other countries, I don't understand how that's something that's like, I should feel like these people that are enlisting are doing for me on my behalf. I don't want us to go to that war. If it were up to me, we wouldn't. So it's like, no, don't say that you're doing that for me, because I don't want you to do it. It doesn't make any sense. Like, I think that we all know we're just, so few people are willing to admit that our government can do any wrong. Yeah. And it's like, do you literally think that every other country is corrupt but ours? It's like, no, we are not this crazy exception. We're not angelic. Like, we have done terrible things. Why do you think that there are no wars fought on our land? Why are we always going to fight a war on someone else's territory? There's a reason for that. Yeah. So it's like, no, I don't see this as being like, oh, now these Latino men have the opportunity to go and fight for our freedom. The only freedom that's being impinged right now is coming from our own government. It's coming from our own judicial system. That's the way I see it.
Like, so for me, in that instance, it wasn't that I'm saying like Latino men shouldn't join the military, because a lot of my friends who joined are very proud, and they're, I don't think they would, if they could go back, they would do it differently. But just the fact that in that moment she framed it like, this is the best, like, this is, like, that's good enough. It's good enough for them to be able to just serve in the military, be separated from their family for long periods of time, risk their lives, possibly get PTSD. Like, we know that Veterans Association, if you're injured, isn't always that great, especially now in this administration when there's like not even like the person who was in charge was resigned or fired. And so and then feeling like I was the only one in the room who was upset or bothered by that comment, and then being like, what do I do with all my feelings? So I literally went to my hotel room and cried because there was like no other way to, it was so much frustration and so much isolation and so much like, who do I tell? There wasn't anyone else to tell. This was a conference where, I think I was the only person of color that went because Ebony and I are in different research groups, so we travel to different conferences. And I even was like, should I tell my white colleagues? And even in itself, it's like, they can understand to an extent, but they're not going to understand to the point where they're not going to be moved to cry like I was.
And they would be like, why wouldn't you want them in the military?
Yeah.
As if the and then, I mean, how many times a day do you drive past a panhandler and see on their sign, vet?
Yeah, a lot.
How often?
Yeah.
And we pretend, oh my God. So we should be encouraging our men of color who already are fighting wars on their own land against Americans.
That's true. Yeah.
We're like, no, that's ridiculous. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I wish I was there. I would have cried with you.
So that's like one conversation. That's one example of many that I have where I felt like, and in this instance, these people are quote unquote woke. They would consider themselves that way because these are people who examine social change and advocate for social, for addressing inequality. But even they didn't see, the woman who was presenting didn't even see her own, how she was being problematic.
Yeah.
And a part of that because there wasn't lots of people who were non-white in the room. And so that's also what happens when I'm, being an academic, is that there aren't that many people that look like us in the rooms with us. And so they're not impacted in the same way. And so it takes an emotional toll where like I dread conferences, not because of my white colleagues don't like conferences because they think it's boring to mingle, they think it's boring to sit for like hours in these talks that you might not listen to. But part of me that dreads conferences is because I don't know when someone is going to say something that is just going to hit a nerve as someone who has experienced these things that they talk about that are so misunderstood, or that someone can just talk about all these statistics and then I can go to lunch with them 10 minutes later and we're talking about what they did over the weekend and not just about the fact that like, I'm sorry, like it's just really heavy to talk about these things, like this hits close to home. And so for me in this episode, in talking about being in non-woke spaces, I don't know how to fully, deal with all these emotions that come up for being in mostly all white spaces in academia. And so,
but see, I mean, I think that what you're saying is interesting because it's not even just necessarily non-woke spaces, right? Because well, one, like, yes, woke is a spectrum, right? Yeah. But I think that there's a ceiling for how quote unquote woke white people can be.
Yeah.
Like, I think that, you and I both know tons of well-meaning white folks, tons of people that will go to bat, people that are very social justice oriented, very concerned about helping and to whatever extent that they can marginalized groups and enlightening their white cisgender brethren about the issues and stuff like that. And those people are more than appreciated. Like, there are tons of white folks in Black Lives Matter. There are tons of white folks fighting for immigrant rights. There are tons of white folks that are hella involved. Super appreciated. But I think that when you live it, like when you actually live this, it's just a different experience, and you can explain it all you want to people that care, and there's no way of, like, the level of empathy can only go so far, and understandably so. It's not like I'm, demonizing anyone who is white for not being able to, like, walk in my shoes. Like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
'cause we were just born in different skin. That
Yeah.
is what it is. But I think, when you can be in a woke and white space, which I would say that conferences, a lot of conferences are, not all of them, but a lot of conferences, particularly in the social sciences, I think are, because so many people study inequality and racial inequality, class inequality, like all of those things. So I think to a certain extent they know what's going on. The lens with which they use to analyze it, very different. Because we're analyzing it from yes, from a theoretical and sociological and all of this other stuff lens, but also very personal and subjective. There's a level of bias that you can't turn off. I don't care what anybody says, you cannot turn it off. And so, like you said, I think in other episodes, like when you're looking at this data that's saying, I don't know, like showing some kind of statistics or negative statistics about your people, like you see yourself, you see your family, you see your friends, your networks. Same here. Like when I see, statistics about maternal mortality for Black women, like I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about like people that I'm related to. These are not some distant Black women over yonder, and I'm like, oh, poor them. It's like, no, poor me, And so it can only extend so far. But that's not, like, again, just to emphasize, because I know that there's some white folks that listen to this podcast. I'm not trying to ostracize anybody, but it's the reality.
And like being able to, I think one of the important things that we would, because I think one of the questions Ebony and I are wrestling with is like, what are our roles in these spaces? And we talked about in our first episode, allyship. So I think for me,
that's a plug for episode 1
true,
if you want to go back.
So I think for me, what would be helpful is if white people or people who don't share the experience, because sometimes woke spaces don't have to be like, maybe it's a class issue and you're just a person who came from a very low economic background and you're around people who haven't experienced what you experienced, or who don't have family, who are super vulnerable, who don't have family, who don't have houses. But for me, it's like to have those people just acknowledge that they don't get it. And that would be helpful, instead of pretending like they know exactly what you're feeling and they know that they can really get, like they really just acknowledging that you have an additional burden, you have an additional thing that you have to deal with that they don't, and being like, I'm grateful that I don't have to do that and you have to, and I see that.
And I support you.
And I support you, and I think that would be more helpful, other than like what Black Girl in Maine was saying, people telling you, suck it up, stop being angry, it's not that bad, or she didn't mean
asking you if you're angry. Oh my God. I've reached a point, white people have asked me that before, or have said that, like, the kind of tapping into the whole angry Black woman thing, and I have reached a point in my life where I had very little fucks left to give. So I know, at this point, I can't imagine that anybody that I'm in a program with would, like, say that to me or say that I'm too angry or whatever. But if that did happen, like, I don't know how that person would be responded to, because I think that right now the climate in our country, like the racial climate, is so thick, like you could cut it with a knife, God forbid, I've heard some people talking about civil war, and I've heard people throwing that around. Not just in terms of race, but also in terms of like political party, and I think that soon somebody is gonna stumble across the wrong person of color, because you've been hearing the video that I posted on our Instagram page today. Did you see that? What? People have just been going nuts. Nuts. And so I think, and these are in public spaces. And so I would not doubt that in predominantly white spaces, people of color are probably having a hard time, or feeling a little bit, uneasy, because it's only a matter of time before somebody gets real bold and says something crazy to you. And how do you how do you respond?
Yeah, or like even to like it doesn't have to be a presentation. It could be to a comment someone said, a statement someone made who you work with, someone who is in your networks that said, because there's so many stories like the Roseanne. One, I can go crazy and tell everyone like, no, like you're wrong, and try to quote unquote educate people. Or two, accept the fact that I have done that so many times where I had told people specifically, like I've had this NFL conversation before with Colin Kaepernick about how I supported it, and they didn't change. All they do is they either try to convince me why I'm wrong, try to convince me why it's not about race, or try to tell me that I just think that everyone is racist. For them, it's a debate, and for me, it's my life. Like, what do you do when that happens? And so I think that maybe some people might have similar things with their friends, and it doesn't have to be white, non-white. I'm sure, like, even within the racial ethnic community, people don't agree with each other, and so even if you have non-white networks, like maybe they say things that you disagree with, but it's to a point now where I really am like, is it worth it? And part of me makes me sad to be like, man, does this mean that I'm losing my fight? Does this mean that I'm like getting worn down? But the other part of me is I'm like, you can't do this all the time. Like, that's not healthy. Like, you really are I just literally can't.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing that we were talking about, too, earlier this week is battle fatigue.
Yeah.
Or not even to call it battle fatigue, just fatigue in general. Trying to, not even necessarily in, like, arguing or debating, but even just explaining. Explaining over and over again why that's not okay, why that's problematic, why that's racist. Why, like, you know, and I think that over time you kind of just get burnt out. Like, how and why do I continue to explain myself if people aren't getting it? But I think, you know, and this is coming from someone who, outside of school, like, I don't find myself in predominantly, I guess, non-woke spaces. Like, I'm very, and I think I've always been, you know, even going back to the whole Roseanne thing, like, I've just never seen that show. And so I was realizing that, you know, when I was thinking back to, like, why I haven't seen that show and what I was actually watching as a child, you know, and I didn't grow up in, like, an Afrocentric or, like, you know, very Black Power household. I think I was just born that way somehow, because every sitcom I can think about watching as a kid was Black, you know, and so I'm like, I mean, I don't know, like, if, like, when Cosby did something, I felt that, you know, when it was like, oh, okay, you know, all the, like, prior episodes and seasons and stuff like that of the Cosby Show is getting cut, I was like, dang, because, like, I grew up watching that, and not even because my parents were watching it. For some reason, I was just drawn. But yeah, I mean, I feel like my entire life, like, I have avoided spaces that don't feel welcoming. You know, I mean, even during undergrad, going to a predominantly white university, like, black students teetered between 1.5 and 2% of the population while I was there, and I found my community among that, like, 1.5%. Like, I was not the person to be venturing out and, you know, being in mostly white spaces. I have a lot of friends that did. And I mean, more power to the people that are doing that. I could only imagine it, so maybe that's why I still feel like I have, you know, some energy and some gusto left in me, because I'm like, I've preserved it by avoiding it. But, yeah, I mean, I think that, all that to say, like, I do think that it is, if you can find it in you, maybe there's a, and I know that this is an unpopular opinion, particularly among a lot of, like, my super woke folks, that we could maybe change our messaging and change our delivery when we're talking to white folks. And so, and definitely not all white people. Like, there are some that just don't deserve any kind of, like, mild manneredness at all. So like if somebody, if you need to cuss out old boy when you walk past him in Jack in the Box, cuss him out. Yeah. You need to cuss out somebody in Starbucks or in, I don't know, wherever. Like, you need cuss him out. You can tell who needs the cussing out and who doesn't. But then for, you know, some people that just genuinely are like, why? Why is that not okay? Like, why is that racist? Like, you know, rather than being like, shut the hell up, like, why don't you understand this, which I've seen, I think I would encourage, because I think we have to think about what the end goal is. Like, is it that we actually want to get through this person and we actually want to see if this person has the capacity to be receptive? Yeah. If we actually want to have a conversation, then I'd say ask questions like, why do you think that this is okay? What about this is not racial? What about this is not, like, so do you think that police brutality is a problem? Like, let's, because that's ultimately what Colin Kaepernick was trying to do, and this turned into something about, this turned into the flag and the military, which to me is just deflecting. Like, in no way is it about that. So, I think we need to take a step back. Do you think that it is wrong for police to shoot or brutalize unarmed black men? If you don't think that's wrong, then we are having the wrong conversation. Like, we're over here trying to talk about Colin Kaepernick and kneeling when we need to scale it way back. Yeah. Like, there's something at the very fundamental elementary level that you're missing. Yeah. So then let's talk about that. Like, why don't you think that's a problem? Oh, well, because if the police are shooting them, then they must deserve it. Why do you think that? Then we're having a conversation about profiling and racial bias. Why do you think that this black man must have deserved it? Like, let's have that conversation, And so I think that, I know that there are a lot of people that are not going to be open to that. Fine. Like, I completely respect that. I understand that it could be tiresome. Like, if you are different than me and you have not gone out of your way to avoid those spaces, then maybe you've been having these conversations forever and you're tired. Yeah. So now all of your responses have turned into, shut the hell up, I don't want to talk to you. If you don't get it, you don't deserve to get it, die. No. But if you do have the energy, I would definitely encourage you to think about, ways that the conversation can be had with, and kind of minimizing how defensive or like a person becomes, how much pushback, because again, like, we're talking to people that a lot of times that don't actually think that they're doing anything wrong. Yeah. Don't think that people that look like them are doing anything wrong. They're coming at it from a completely different lens. They didn't live this life. Yeah. So I think that, handle it in the same way that you would want somebody to talk to you if you, I don't know, if they were coming to you and pushing you on an issue that you didn't necessarily agree with. And I'm sure that there are a ton of things. I mean, maybe not for, again, like my super social justice oriented people. Like, I think that for a lot of us, we kind of appeal, or our sensibilities are kind of lean toward toward the hand of the marginalized group, no matter what, the ism is. But for some people, like I have a lot of friends who are black, but don't really do the LGBTQ thing, can't really, are super Christian and all that stuff, got it. But imagine if someone who was advocating for LGBTQ rights came up to you and was trying to have that conversation. Like, you might be a little bit defensive. So, put yourself in, while you want somebody to put themselves in your shoes, put yourself in somebody else's shoes and have the conversation in that way, I think. Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And then I think what I've learned is, like, you have to recharge. And so if you're one of those people that is in a lot of woke spaces, if you're in a predominantly white area of the country, or if your work, you're maybe one of the only non-white people, or if you just find yourself around people who don't share the same experiences or something, you have to, what I found is look for, whether that be through podcasts, whether that be online forums, whether that be texting your Skype. Yeah, if you have 3 non-white friends and they don't live near you, but you can text them and stuff, that support is just so important, because you can't just hold it in. You can hit us up. Yeah, no, definitely. Don't be shy. Like, no, and that's a whole reason to have this podcast, is to be able to just have conversations that anyone, anywhere can listen to. And I find myself sometimes going and listening to podcasts, people who aren't living in my city, and I feel really recharged and feel like, okay, they did the yelling for me. Yeah. They were able to rant at these things. I agree. I can laugh at it. And now I feel like I got that out of my system and got that out of the way. But it just helps to be able to find some sort of comfort. And if you don't know anyone physically that you can do that with, just seek out these people. Like, the internet is an amazing place to do that. Emailing people, emailing us, DMing us, talking to us.
we'd be down to even, have Skype or video chat, just to
Build
check
community.
in. Yeah, build a community. And there's lots of communities. There's an app called Huddle, and that app allows you to have, so it's basically like support groups for anything. And so you can find groups for if you have depression, if you're an introversion, like anything you can find on there. So I'm sure you'd be able to find like a people of color group on there, Facebook groups. It's just really important for us to be able to recharge and to be able to just kind of release and self-care, because that's really important, because it does take a toll. And I mean, it's not just us saying it from experience, but just like research shows that if you are isolated and if you feel alone and if you don't feel connected to a community, if you don't feel that you belong somewhere, if you feel uncomfortable all the time, it takes a toll on your mental well-being, and
which then takes a toll on your physical well-being.
Yeah,
those things are very connected.
Yeah, which then affects like not only your health, but how well you think, how well you respond, your cognitive skills, your mood, your just whether you want to eat or not, whether you feel like going to exercise. And so it's just all really, really connected. And so just wanting to, make sure in this conversation to stress that, yes, there's so much to be able to complain about. I mean, even on our In the Know, we had to kind of stop ourselves and be like, we could go on forever about mass incarceration, how terrible it is. But just like every once in a while, forcing yourself to just do something where you feel like you can vent some of that.
Okay, well, we're going to wrap up there. Thanks so much for listening.
Yes, if you have any questions or any feedback, feel free to email us at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com. We're also on iTunes now, so you can subscribe to our podcast.
Yeah, we're on the Apple podcast. We're trying to get to Android. So if you're an Android listener and you're listening on YouTube or you're listening on, I don't know, some other outlet, we're going to come to a podcast app near you.
Yes, also feel free to follow us on Instagram at Wokish Podcast. Feel free to DM us. We do a good job, I think, of trying to hit back to people, and we appreciate all the likes, all the comments. Definitely let us know if you have any ideas for topics, if you think that you agree or disagree. We just really want you guys to feel like this is a community that you guys can go to.
Yeah, and you can tweet us at Wokish Talk.
Thank you. We'll see you guys next week.